Okay, hi everyone. This is Rick Arlo with Complion. Thanks for joining our session here today in terms of achieving more efficient e-regulatory study management. Really excited to have this opportunity to connect. Might not be quite the same as being in Chicago here together, but I'm excited to have the opportunity to connect with everyone and really, hear your questions at the end of this presentation as well too. So for the presentation today, we have myself. I'm the founder and CEO of Complion, really a leading e-regulatory vendor working with many leading cancer centers, medical centers, and other organizations. And also very happy here to have Christine joining as well too. I was a clinical research manager for the University of Cincinnati Cancer Center. Christine, do you want to provide a quick introduction here for yourself as well?
Sure. Thanks, Rick. Hi, everyone. My name is Christine Vollmer. Like Rick said, I'm the regulatory manager at the University of Cincinnati Cancer Center. I've been with UC since January of 2019 and have a wonderful team here who's responsible for the Cancer Center's regulatory work and study startup work. So we've been working really closely with Complion for several years. So I'm excited to be sharing a bit more today about our experience with them.
Perfect. Thank you, Christine. And for all of those I haven't had a chance to meet yet that are in the audience listening, I hope I have the opportunity to get a chance to connect with you as well in terms of your questions here today or sometime in the future together in person as that's returning. So really to start things off here for today, we were able actually a couple of years ago to present and collaborate together with the UCCC and really talking about the specific process in terms of implementation and rollout of any regulatory solution, both for the Cancer Center as well as at the broader academic medical center with the University of Cincinnati. And so really what we're going to be able to first talk about is I'll provide a quick update in terms of some of the key components for what guided the initial need for a solution from the UCCC, and then really turn things over to Christine to provide an update. Then I can also share a couple of key points as well as new best practices and learnings here that may be applicable to other individuals back at your cancer centers as well too. And so initially there were several key pain points that really came out from partnering closely with the UCCC early on. And so obviously I think there were initial challenges with limited transparency, right, into the work that needs to be done. And also what are the compliance, issues that are happening, a high degree of variability as well too across individual staff members at the organization for how they manage this work, which would make things like cross coverage and turnover even more challenging as well too. Ultimately culminating in a high amount of burden on staff, and many times not just in the initial startup period where there's a lot of regulatory documents and signatures and requirements that need to happen, but also throughout really the lifetime of that trial as well too, especially looking at more complex trials where you could have multiple cohorts, and it's not just about updating that information, but ensuring that every right investigator and staff member, even the pharmacist and lab staff, have everything that they need. And ultimately, that's also leading to an increased workload on the staff and creating barriers to really open up every study here that's needed for the patients and that the doctors want to be able to engage in. And so some of the initial goals at the start of this partnership that we had, identified together were being able to provide that level of, multilateral access here to all of the stakeholders at the organization, not just the individual, coordinators or regulatory staff members and or monitors that need to have access, but across really all of the key stakeholders here in the process, and ensure consistency in the work to drive to higher levels of compliance and audit readiness at all times. Further, being able to engage staff for both initial rapid adoption as well as really full adoption by being able to understand what those unique requirements and processes were at the organization, and help to actually build that into the software itself, and ultimately increase efficiency, so that the organization could help drive to opening up every study that's needed, while being able to ensure that level of compliance and audit readiness at all times. And so, as I mentioned, these are some of the initial pieces. And so what that we had shared and talked together about with the UCCC. And now what I'm going to do is step back and hand it over to Christine to talk about some of the updates here for what this process has looked like at their organization. And then I'll be able to come in here towards the end to help share some other key best practices and learnings as well.
Thanks, Rick. So one of our major issues at University of Cincinnati that I think many other centers face as well is a lack of physical space. We have a growing team. We have a lot of stuff like charts, regulatory binders, lab kits, and not enough physical space to house everything. We were also previously maintaining physical regulatory binders for each study with paper and wet ink signed documents. So, as we were adopting Complion, we were still printing and filing documents into a physical binder in duplicate with our electronic binders. So this was causing, space waste and paper waste. Additionally, UC is a very large and sprawling institution. So we had huge inefficiencies in trying to locate investigators and obtain wet ink signatures on our physical documents. Our clinical trials office is not located in the hospital or in close proximity to the cancer center. So it was difficult for us to be tracking down clinical staff in person. So trying to get wet ink signatures and locate and maintain physical documents not only was inefficient, but also had huge impacts on our compliance. We had documents that were misplaced, binders are becoming difficult to locate, and wet ink signatures can take several weeks or months to get back to our office, or never come back to us at all. And finally, like Rick was mentioning before, our staff needed better access to our study documents. So like I mentioned, our institution is large, and it was difficult for a clinical team member to access a protocol or consent form remotely or from clinic. So we needed our clinical research coordinators and investigators, our pharmacy staff, the lab staff, really all of our research teams to be able to access these study documents and the most current documents like protocols and manuals and consents in locations where our office's network might not be accessed. And then in addition to these challenges, in early 2020, the COVID pandemic hit, and much of our staff, including our whole regulatory team, immediately shifted to remote work, which was something we had never done before. So, the pandemic affected almost every aspect of our lives and really changed how our whole office functioned. So, like most other institutions too, it forced remote work. And for us, this shift resulted in major changes to our internal workflows. Many of these were how we were sharing and documenting information. So we'd already made a huge push toward electronic regulatory binders in 2019, but before 2020, we were still doing many things in paper. So with this shift to remote work, it quickly became necessary to achieve 100% electronic regulatory binders, with all of our documents and signatures filed electronically. We really needed to eliminate the need for paper documents and physical binders and any wet ink signatures. It also became crucial to be able to provide remote access of our essential documents to our monitors who were no longer allowed on our site. So working with Complion over the last year, we adapted many of our SOPs and workflows to revolve around our electronic binders. The biggest hurdles we faced during this implementation were modifying all of our processes to accommodate full electronic work, pushing for the acceptance of many of these process changes by our internal research teams, and finally getting acceptance from external sponsors and monitors for these updated processes. So a few of the key changes we made were that we moved to fully electronic conflict of interest forms, something we had previously always collected in paper. Secondly, we adopted electronic monitoring logs, another log that was always maintained in a paper binder. And finally, we implemented fully electronic delegation of authority logs, again, eliminating the need for a paper log and wetting signatures there. So we shifted our practice so that we now use electronic signature on all documents. We use electronic documentation of protocol training on all of our protocols. And through these updates, we've fully eliminated the need for paper and wetting signatures. So we no longer even will accept the shipment of a regulatory binder from an external sponsor. So what have the results looked like? From 2019 to 2020, we more than doubled the number of documents that we were filing electronically, going from about 4,700 documents in 2019 to over 10,000 in 2020. From 2019 to 2020, we nearly doubled the number of electronic signatures obtained through Complion. So we obtained less than 4,000 via Complion in 2019 versus almost 8,000 in 2020. And we also saw a significant decrease in the number of boxes of paper our office ordered every month, decreasing 40% from 2019 to 2020. Additionally, through internal audits, we have seen a major increase in our regulatory compliance in the last year, having everything documented electronically, and not having the issue of missing signatures, missing documents, and missing binders. So what do we hope for the future? We hope to continue to eliminate paper and physical documentation in other areas of our office as well. So, while the COVID pandemic brought devastation in many areas of life, there were also many creative and innovative achievements that occurred, especially in the workplace. And we saw achievements, it's an increase in productivity and efficiency, and an important step towards sustainability by making this shift toward electronic binders. We hope to continue to increase our regulatory compliance via the use of Complion and continuing to move to this practice of 100% e-binders. We hope to increase efficiencies that will allow us to open trials more quickly and easily, with the ultimate goal that we can offer treatment to any patient who might come to UC. Our cancer center is also working toward NCI designation. So really all these changes are aiding in that effort. So with that, I'll hand it back over to you, Rick, so you can explain a bit more about, UC's partnership with Complion.
Perfect. Thank you, Christine. So I think some of the most positive outcomes here that we've seen with UC and with other similar organizations, right, hasn't just been in the reduction of, physical paper and remote access, but the ability to actually ensure a higher level of compliance and audit readiness, and ultimately the ability of that to enable you to achieve that core mission, right, of being able to get every patient, every doctor on the studies here that you need. Because if you're not able to ensure that level of compliance, it's often a bottleneck to being able to start the studies here that you want to, that's in front of you. And I think a couple of the key trends here that we've seen is both, with more complex, trials and with things like more personalized treatment, it's not just, um, a single, right, document that you need anymore, but you could have multiple cohorts, right? You could have multiple informed consent forms, multiple key versions of all of those documents that you need to be able to manage, and especially with larger numbers of staff, with those, not just the doctors, but the additional nurses and coordinators and lab techs and pharmacists and everyone that needs to make sure they're getting those most current versions, and also knowing exactly what they need to have when that patient is right there in the office, right, for that golden opportunity to, get on a study or to have the right information, when you're seeing them as well too, is absolutely, critical. And especially with this work being done remotely today, what we've really seen is that the drive for that remote work, obviously required here through COVID and now going to be the new norm moving forward, creates an even harder job and burden associated with that, monitoring process, because now you're not going through that with the CRA, but they're sending you so many questions and so many queries when they just can't even find the right information, and where is it, right? And so really by being able to, not just digitize, but by being able to require, all the right information that needs to be on the right documents, that's what's going to enable, all of your staff members to have the right information that they need, to really, as we've seen with other similar groups, reduce the number of monitor queries by up to 75%, as they can search and find what they need to in a self-service basis. By being able to ensure things like patient safety and study conduct, by actually controlling access, not relying on a person to have to remember to share and unshare document by document, but by being able to lock that down directly, by being able to help identify and replicate the requirements from one study to another, because a lot of the information, many times, 50 or 60% or more of those requirements can be the same study by study, especially if you're running more complex and personalized treatments with the same drug across multiple trials, or using the same staff and labs and things that need to be credentialed, right? And especially as that is a driver to be able to engage those additional satellite locations. And so I think some of the really exciting things that we've seen by being able to drive that level of compliance and ensure that in the software, as well as, as Christine talked about, being able to update those best practices and not just rely on training of staff, but be able to actually include that and update that into the software itself. You can get both rapid initial adoption and full adoption, and remove those barriers to actually drive very large numbers of new study increases that you can open up while not being bogged down in the risks of non-compliance and ongoing work that needs to be there. In this case, with other clients, up to 200% or more ability to open up, more trials here. And so, as I mentioned, some of the key things here that we've been able to identify, and some of the key things to really look for as you're looking to roll out eRegulatory at your organizations, right, are being able to actually ensure the right information on the right documents, not relying on a person to have to tag that on, to control that level of access to the right people, and have those, naming conventions and information so that people know at their fingertips, whether it's the doctor who's seeing that patient and getting ready to consent them, or the monitor that needs to be able to search on their own and know exactly where things are and what they are without even needing to issue a query or talk with your team, right? Is really some of the big opportunities, as well as I mentioned, actually being able to help identify and replicate the same information that's being used study by study by study, so that you're constantly up to date, without ultimately the additional levels of processes and training that might be required for staff, right? If those things aren't being, required within the software, and ultimately enabling you to get to that level of full adoption. Ultimately, as well, eRegulatory can pay for itself by reducing the cost, not just the material and archiving costs, but also the additional work that goes into traveling, to monitoring, to preparing for every monitor visit. We've seen with other clients the ability to help accelerate 5 times faster to the monitoring visit itself. And as I mentioned, eliminate the actual time spent with the monitor. 75 to 100% of the time is it's self-service, if they can search and find exactly what they need to without needing to, get to your teams, and by being able to not just engage and get electronic signatures, but actually track down by version, by staff member, exactly what's been signed off on, what hasn't been either, right? And so, ultimately, I think some of the key things that we've seen from other similar cancer centers are, not just addressing what that burden is, but being able to promote the ability to do and open every study that you need to, by actually ensuring that level of compliance, and ensuring that level of audit readiness, and getting to that level of full adoption, both rapidly by being more intuitive and not requiring as much user training to have to remember, how do I file this stuff, and what study do I have to push that to, who needs to be shared and unshared now, by actually automating those components and providing the flexibility and expertise to partner with you to further fine-tune that for your organization. And instead of having to re-roll out training that people often forget, to just include that right in the software as those fail safes, right? To really get to that level of both rapid initial and full adoption. So thank you everyone for attending the presentation today. As I mentioned, I'm really excited to be a part of this, as we are every year. Excited for this opportunity, including, our contact information here on this slide, and really want to be able to open up for your questions. Please fire away.